Yeah, and we end at what time?
Right at 12.
Okay. All right, great.
If you don't end in time, then there's this,
No,
this herd that comes coming in looking for their parents. So.
Right. All right, hi. So we are going to begin, and I guess we will not go past 12, and I'll try to, I brought a big show, you could say, about what we did this summer, presentation about what we did, and I think we'll be able to get that in with plenty of time for Q&A after that. That's my goal. So let's pray for a second. Lord, thank you for the worship this morning, that we could express our love to you and pour out our hearts to you, be quiet before you, be aware of your presence with us as we approached you in your holiness. As we talk about, what I was involved with this summer, and then get into some other questions and answers that I have no idea what that will be, we pray that you will once again make us aware of your presence here. Thank you for this opportunity and that we could be together. In Jesus' name, amen. I have mentioned here in the past when I visited the church that in 2001, I think it was, maybe the year 2000, could have been 2000. Anyway, we started a big major project that we called Behold Your God, where for the first until 2008, well, we actually ended it in 2006, then I'll tell you what we started in 2008. But for those first number of years, we went to every city outside of Israel that has a Jewish community of 25,000 or more, and we did big engagements with the Jewish community to try to connect with them around Jesus and the gospel. And then it took us to about 66 cities, I think it was. And then in 2008, we began in Israel. Same thing, but only within Israel. And that took us 10 years to cover Israel. And the last of it was this summer, was Jerusalem, which we saved for the last because Jerusalem's a tough place. So that's what I want to, you can go ahead and turn the slide. That's what I want us to take a look at this morning. That's just your typical view of Jerusalem, you know, the Dome of the Rock there. That's on where the temple once stood. And then that's West Jerusalem, kind of the new city behind it that you can see, where our new embassy our embassy has been moved to. But Jerusalem is so important. If you go to the next slide, this is an old map that you see on the upper left, Europe, upper right is Asia, and then down below is Africa. And that circle in the center, if you could read that, it says Jerusalem. This was this common understanding that Jerusalem is so important. It's at the center of the world. And in Judaism, they say that Jerusalem is like the belly button of the world, that there's an umbilical cord right from Jerusalem straight up to heaven, because it's, you know, God, I guess, birthed Jerusalem, somehow is connected like a mother to a child that intimately. And it's so central. And, you know, it's mentioned whether it's Jerusalem, Zion, my holy hill, my holy mountain, the city of the great king. So many ways it's mentioned hundreds of times in the Old Testament, as well as in the New. So let's keep going. So now in our ministry, Jews for Jesus, we kind of have these three ways of engaging people. We go and tell them about Jesus and the gospel. We create events where they can come and see what Jewish believers in Jesus act like and sound like and the things we do, and they can hear about the gospel in event-type settings. And then love and serve, which is rather new in our ministry, but it means coupling what the gospel message with acts of service. You know, Jesus fed people and healed people and that kind of thing. So we also want to be doing acts of service for people. So next slide. So what we did in Jerusalem this year was we had a large group come, that were broken among 9 different teams to reach different segments of the Jerusalem community, or Jerusalem demographic, society there. So we had our service team. What that was we brought people over from churches, non-Jews, from churches to come, and we linked up with Israeli organizations who had needs, and you'll see a video, so I won't say anything more. The video really describes what that was. Then we had a DAF team. They were not crazy, no, they're not DAF, but stands for drugs, addictions, prostitution, and homelessness. So reaching the down and outers in Jerusalem. Then a team to reach the arts community. Boomers team was a misnomer, although most of our staff on that team were kind of boomers age. But it was really the English-speaking people in Jerusalem, and there's a lot. There's a lot of English in Jerusalem. And why? Because most of the English-speaking world doesn't want to make Aliyah. They don't want to move to Israel because they're very comfortable. You know, the Jewish community in America, by and large, financially, we're doing pretty good. Same thing in Australia, England, South Africa. So why would they go to Israel? Probably only if they're really religious. And if you're really a religious Jewish person, where do you want to go? Jerusalem. So that's why there's a lot of English in Jerusalem, as well as Hebrew and Russian and Yiddish, etc. Then we had a Russian language team, a sports-oriented team, a team to reach students, both secular and religious students. Then a team to reach Haredi women. Haredi is the ultra-Orthodox. I'll tell you what that word means later, I think. And then Haredi men, and that's the team that I led. So let's move on. So this is the DAF team. They would go to soup kitchens. They would go out till, probably 3 in the morning on the streets, just trying to minister to people that were out there that were homeless. They did all kinds of things. The guy in the upper right, who's not fuzzed out on his face, he's a guy on our staff who himself, he's an Israeli guy. He was a drug addict for years and got into crime. He was in Israeli jails, prison for maybe 5 years, I think, and had a radical, what's the word I'm looking for? Encounter with Jesus, and his life was transformed. And he is so powerful as he goes to some of these places, and people look at him and they say, I was in prison with you. I remember you. What happened to you? How are you so different now? And he has this great ministry. And so anyway, that's just a look at some of the kinds of things they did, and they were very effective. And this now has spawned for our ministry a permanent continuation of what they're doing. We have a team of people in Jerusalem on our staff that are doing this kind of ministry. We never had that before, so it's very, very exciting. The next slide.
Coming to Israel, loving your neighbor is super easy. The culture here is very welcoming, very inviting to us. So it's very, very natural for us to love those around us.
By loving people in our community, it's really grown our hearts to love people around the world.
Love our neighbor to us means to do service for them. So wherever God puts us, whether it's working in a park, working in a nursing home, we've been trying to do it as joyfully as possible.
And I can't think of a better way to love our neighbor than to serve them, especially those that are overlooked. And here in the nursing home, there are many that need love, need some attention, need a touch, need a kind word, even a smile.
We have to dig out all of the soil that took out this wall so they can build a brand new rock wall.
We've had 4 or 5 people that have come here, and we've been cleaning up this park.
What we're doing is, if you look, you'll see these piles of rubbish around. So we've just gone around and have raked leaves and pine needles. And here in the corner, if you look, you can see that we're leveling out this hill.
It makes us feel like we're connecting with God by doing what God's called us to do.
Our assignment is near the hiking trails, so we've had marvelous conversations with locals and families as they pass by. Many of them have asked, why would you want to come here and do this?
They expect us to be touring, not volunteering.
It's one thing to sort of see the sights, but it's another thing to actually like work the land.
I think it's been a blessing to us.
The thing that I appreciate the most is the unity that we have. Genesis 12 says that all nations will be blessed because of Israel. I certainly have been.
People ask us, where are you going? I said, we're going to the cemetery to work. And they're going like, man, I'm sorry. We say, oh, man, you don't understand. This place is phenomenal. People come in here and a lot of times they'll sit down and they'll go like, there's peace here, there's shalom here. And they don't understand why.
We're here to love our neighbor.
It's not about us, it's about serving in the name of the Messiah, Yeshua.
I would tell anyone who would like to come to Israel to do this to please do it, because it is an amazing, amazing opportunity.
I don't know what that guy's last comment was. I never have missed it before. I think he said, if I can do it, so
Coming
can you.
to Israel.
Oh. No, we're done. Don't worry about it. It wasn't that important. But that was a look at what our service teams did. And we're going to continue bringing groups over to, as they said, not to do a tour of Israel to see all the biblical places, but to actually serve in the land and get gospel opportunities with Israelis through what they're doing. The arts community, these are all our kookiest staff in the lower right there. No, they're some of our fun folks. And music, visual arts, some really gifted people. The guy in that photo on the lower right, the guy on the left of that photo with the little bit longer hair, he runs our work in Israel now. He has a haircut now, though. But his name is Eli Birnbaum. And Eli, who is an Israeli, he, before our camp, months and months before the campaign, maybe a year before, I can't remember exactly when, he got together a group of, I don't know how many, maybe a dozen Israeli artists, not believers. A few were believers, mostly not believers, and said, we want to do an art exhibit a year from now or whenever it was on these words of Jesus. And it was at the end of the gospel, Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. And he read the passage because they don't know it at all. So he read it, and he led a Bible study with these dozen Israeli non-believing artists on this passage of Matthew and said, now create a piece of art based on that passage, which they did. And we had this show, and of course, when they had the show, not only the artists are there, but their families and their friends come. So it was loaded up with hundreds of Israelis seeing an art show about Jesus and who he was and what he had said. It was an amazing thing. And then some of the other folks in there who were musical, they did this music jam. They connected with some kind of the underground music scene in Jerusalem, and they rented this old, maybe couple 100-year-old house or something with stone archways and, really old and cool. And then they, for 1 week, had this I think it was almost, it wasn't quite 24/7, but it was crazy hours of artists just coming in there and jamming. But then they had artwork people. You could create art about Jesus, and all these conversations were taking place. So they just did all of that kind of stuff to engage people about Jesus. You can do almost anything. Not that these guys did this, but here's just a funny example. We don't really hand out gospel tracts anymore the way we used to in Jews for Jesus. But back in the days when we did, I was told by a guy in New York that they had run out of gospel tracts. And he said, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to engage people about Jesus? He says, oh, I know. Let's go out there with, we'll fold them up just like they are, but blank pieces of paper. And let's use them as conversation starters. So they went out there and handed people blank pieces of paper and got into conversations about Jesus with people. So you don't need much. You can do it almost any kind of way. Anyway, let's keep going. Next slide. Yeah, boomers. So what they did was, well, several things you can see here. In the middle picture on the bottom in Israel, they have them here too, like these neighborhood lending libraries that are just free and on somebody's corner, and people put books. So they were putting books about, Hebrew books related to Jesus in these lending libraries. So, and then hanging out there, and if getting in conversations, and people might take those books. But then, no, there's more. Not only that, but they created a booth in this one. It's the old train station area where it's now like shops and booths and restaurants. They call it First Station in Jerusalem. And it's an area where there's a lot of English speakers. And some of our staff who are very artsy threw clay pots, and they wove stuff or sewed stuff, I don't know. And they were selling stuff. But they got into lots and lots of conversations, and the place was run by an Orthodox Jewish woman. And she was getting complaints. Do you know who those people are? And what the blah, 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 blah. And she had grown very fond of us. And she said, yes, I know who they are, and if it bothers you, that's your problem. And she invited our staff over to her house on Shabbat evenings, and I guess it was very successful. The reason I say I guess is because when you get to the team I was leading in a little while, you'll see I had no contact with any of these teams. So I heard about it all afterwards. Anyway, let's keep going. The Russian language team, whenever our Russian-speaking staff come by, kind of jokingly, we don't really do this, but it's kind of like in our hearts. We all start going like this, because our Russian language folks are some of the most hardworking, dedicated people ever. And they're amazing. We've got branches, in Russia and the Ukraine and Belarus, but they came to Israel, and they did a Marc Chagall art show of his. We have some of his work, and he did a lot of work that contained Jesus in his paintings. He's a very famous Jewish Russian painter. And then they would, of course, visit people. But they saw 58, I think they took tours. They led tours on some buses. They'd say, hey, to the Russian speakers, you want to go, we'll give you a tour, and blah, blah, blah. And on the tour, they had a chance to present the gospel. They saw 58 Russian-speaking Israelis receive the Lord, and even had the opportunity to baptize a few. So, okay, next. The sports guys, yeah. How do you use sports for the gospel? How do you parlay that, I wouldn't have known, but they figured it out. They sponsored a soccer tournament for men, and they offered a pretty reasonable prize. So to get your team together, register to compete for this prize, and it was sponsored by whatever they said, I can't remember. But through the tournament, it's like, well, who are you guys, and why are you doing this? And there were all these gospel conversations. Then apparently, women in Jerusalem approached this group and said, there are no soccer tournaments for women in Israel. Would you organize one for us too? Sure. So they did that, and they had a women's soccer tournament, and a lot of the participants were Orthodox women. And they had lots and lots of gospel conversations with them. Then when the two tournaments were done, they started going to this well-known park, Sachar Park, which is a big, big park right there in Jerusalem, very well-known. Everybody goes there. And they started every day in the same place in the park and at the same time of day having free exercise classes. And they advertised them. Come to this free exercise class, Sachar Park. And they were legit. They bought good equipment for them. And one of our staff guys, he's like a bodybuilder kind of guy. I mean, his name is Max. Sounds even like that, right? And he made Aliyah. He immigrated from Russia to Israel. So he's, a big, strong, beefy Russian guy. I'm Max. And anyway, and he led these classes. And we had some other people that were pretty good at leading these classes. And they were astounded. It started with maybe 5, 6 people, and by the end, it grew to about 25 people coming every single day for this class. But it wasn't just the exercise. From what I'm told from my friends who led this outreach, lots and lots of interaction about the gospel and why are you doing this and who are you, and anyway, amazing. Let's keep going. University students, those are gifts on the upper left there. They went on campus and they gave little gift packs. I can't remember all that was in there, but there was I think there was a Gospel of John in Hebrew in there, along with things that students like. And they made a lot of relationships. This tended to be some of our younger staff, so they could relate to the students and vice versa. And they would go out and hang out late at night in places where these students were hanging out, and they were very, very effective. And the ministry continues, to a lot. With all of these teams, the follow-up is continuing, by the way, even to today. Next team. The Haredi, men's and women's outreaches. I'm not going to talk so much about the women's outreach. Haredi women are, how many of you, this is a real non sequitur, how many of you are Rolling Stones fans or can admit it? Okay, nobody. One guy. Okay, you're fired, sir. No, but you remember their song, Under My Thumb? Well, Haredi women are really under the thumb of Haredi men in their society. They don't have a voice. They don't have rights. Abuse is very rampant. It's a very tough life if you're a Haredi woman. You marry young, real young, arranged marriages. You're supposed to crank out 8 to 10 kids. It's difficult. I could go on and on about it. So our women thought, how can we even break through and begin to interact with them? So this community has their own kind of phone books. So they started making calls, offering to help the women at home. Would you allow some Christians to come in and clean your house? Oh, duh, sure. Would you want help with this, maybe shopping or errands or things like that? And so they used that service orientation and really had some very sweet encounters with many of these women. And the woman down in the blue, in the middle on the bottom, she lives in Toronto. She's on our staff, but she is continuing to lead out in this ministry because far from being over, we're right on the front end of this. So let's go to the next slide, though. Okay, this is the Haredi men's team, and this is the team that I led. And can you find me in that photo? All right, I'm the fourth from the left with the hat and this is actually the jacket I have on that photo is the jacket I'm wearing this morning. Such a deal. I got this nice jacket in the ultra-Orthodox community, $37. Can you believe it? $37. I'll tell you the story later. Anyway, but we also, like the women, the only way to engage the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi, all right, Haredim. What does that word mean? Lacharod. It's a verb. It means to tremble or to shake or even to become excited about. It's in Isaiah chapter 66, I think it is. It speaks of, Lord, those who tremble at your word. So maybe technically some of us this morning are Haredim. If you tremble at God's word now and then. That's where the word comes from. That's how they don't use the term ultra-Orthodox. They use the term Haredim. So the only way to engage that community is to fit in to some extent culturally, even by the way you can see by the way we dressed, etc. If you have questions about that, I'll answer later. I don't want to take too much time. So let's go to the next slide. One of the things that this community does is they communicate through the use of posters. They don't listen to, they don't have TVs, they don't go on the internet by and large. It's a big war against the internet right now. They don't read the regular newspapers, but if you go on their streets, they're lined with posters about everything important. Sometimes they'll use comic images. I noticed on some of my prep trips to Jerusalem. So I got this idea, what if we create a story to present the gospel to them in this format? And we tried it. By the way, if you've heard of the Action Bible, some of you have heard of that, it's a comic kind of Bible. The guy who did the artwork in there is the guy who did the art for our posters. I got in touch with him and through a friend of a friend. So that was a big job because he doesn't know anything about that community. There's a lot of back and forth. But he did an amazing job. And we're putting these posters up on their bulletin boards that line their streets. And well, let's go to the next couple slides, I guess. So, this is a video, I guess, that my iPhone made for me without even telling me. So you see the interest in them. So let's go to the next slide, whatever it is. Oh, no, not this. Yeah. So you can see our posters. You can see it on the far left there. These guys are, as soon as we put them up, boom, they're there reading. What is this about? Next slide. Oh, not that many. That was like 3 or 4. Go back, go back, go back, go back. This one. All right, that one. That's a good one. All right. That's a good one, too. All right. So he's reading it. So we would go back to our car with our bucket and our stuff. We learned how to make that, the paste. That was very interesting. And then right away, these guys would come up and read what we put up. Go to the next one. This guy in his zebra, that's stripes, if you can see it. They call it a zebra coat. But it's just a certain sect of Hasidic Jews. And he's very carefully reading it. We got to about poster number, there were 12 episodes. We got to number 3. We learned some things through this. There's always something to learn. As hard as we could study ahead of time and prepare, there's always things we don't know. So we learned might have gone a little too fast, too far. I thought we wouldn't start seeing trouble until about episode number 6. But we started getting trouble at 2 and 3 because of something we put in there. So the next slide shows that there were these articles that began to appear. This is a Haredi, that says Haredi 10. It's one of their news sources, and they talk about literally the headline on this poster on this article says, the Christian comics, this is how missionaries penetrate the hearts of children in Haredi neighborhoods. Okay, that's what that headline says. Very inflammatory. In the article itself, they say, well, it doesn't really appear that these comics are geared toward children. They realize that, but they use a headline like that. And they saw one small thing we had, and they wanted to figure it out, and they sent it to some scholars at Hebrew University, and said, oh yeah, this is related to a part of the New Testament. And anyway, it became kind of a big deal. So then the next slide shows that these warning posters came out. Warning, warning, missionerim bemasveh Haredi, means missionaries in Haredi disguise. And I could read the rest of it, but it was trying to tell people to be on their guard. Let's keep going. And they began to, tear them down, to face them. That's just episode number 1. We did get to 3, but wherever they were, they started ripping them off. But next, I don't remember. Oh, this. So I want to show you we didn't just do posters. We did a lot of things. This book is a book that in its look is very similar to the types of books that ultra-Orthodox would read. They're very ornate, very fancy. There's a lot of gold and embossed flowers and things like that. But what this is, I went in maybe 8 months before as one of my prep trips to Jerusalem. Maybe it was a year before. It was a year. And I went to a friend of mine who does publishing. He makes very nice books. He's a Messianic Jewish guy who has an organization and a publishing wing. And I said, his name is Boaz. And I said, Boaz, you make the most beautiful books. You make, I would call your books gorgeous. And we're going to be doing this outreach, and I need something with the gospel in it or something, and so that it looks like an ultra-Orthodox book. I kid you not. He said, I'm already doing it. He says, I got a gift from a big donor, and I decided to put the 4 Gospels together in a volume like that. He didn't have it ready then. He was showing me pictures, and it was like, there's a verse, Isaiah, I think it's Isaiah 65:24, I think it is, that says, and it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer them. And while they are yet speaking, I will hear their prayer. That's exactly what happened here. I went to meet with him to see if he would be willing to do this project. He was on it, and he said, we don't have any way to distribute these things, so we would love to partner with you, and you can do that. Oh, it was a match made in heaven. So we had these books ready in time, and we didn't just hand them out like that. No way. When we had a deep enough conversation with a Haredi guy, we would give him a book. And so it wasn't a large number. We only handed out in the month we were doing this 55 of these. 55. When we told him that we got 55 of these into Haredi hands, he was leaping cartwheels for joy. He couldn't believe that we were able to get that many out to that extent. So that was good. Yeah, let's keep going. We tried other approaches. That is, that's Matthew 7, written in 2 types of Hebrew font that only the ultra-Orthodox use. Well, sort of. Okay, what do I mean? The big one is the way the Torah looks. You know, the law of Moses on the big scroll when they read it in the synagogue. That's what it looks like, is the big font. The little font is something called Rashi script. Rashi was he's like the top rabbi from the Middle Ages. Everybody, it's kind of like Billy Graham on steroids. I mean, Rashi, I don't know how to tell you how big Rashi is. In the Talmud, you can't read it without Rashi. Torah, you can't understand it without Rashi. I mean, he's like that. So, and he developed his own Hebrew font, which is, some of the letters are weird and different. And if you don't learn it, like Israelis, they can't read that. Only the ultra-Orthodox read that. So we put Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, because we learned ultra-Orthodox resonate with the language in Sermon on the Mount. It sounds very familiar, it touches their heart. So we put that in a script that they would know it was for them. Anyway, keep going. And we put these up everywhere. One of the biggest things we did was pick up Haredi hitchhikers. Every day we had some of my team out picking up Haredi hitchhikers. These were kind of acts of service. We probably did it 200 times over the course of the month. And it's a perfect setting to, in a very natural way through conversation, to begin to talk about Jesus or our faith a little bit. It would only be, you could only get so far. Some of them went deeper, some not. But, you know, a 15 to 25-minute ride is a great length of conversation. And we got a lot of contacts and people that were willing to talk with us again through these initial hitchhiking rides. Let's continue. Oh, let's just play this and then I'll tell you what it is. It's a video. That was one of the holidays. So there were 2 holidays during our outreach. That was one of them. It's called, well, no, the pool comes later. But anyway, it's called Lag BaOmer. It doesn't matter what the holiday is. But that just gives you a sense of the numbers and the intensity of the community that we're trying to reach. And full disclosure, every single day, everyone on my team experienced a combination of nervousness and anxiety and helplessness and identity issues and inner conflicts and fears. It was a very, very difficult part of the Jerusalem society to try to reach with the gospel. That's the honest truth, is if there's a dishonest truth. But so, okay, let's go on. We found, we would try to hang out where they hung out, essentially, to see if we could get into some relationships. Next, what do we have? That's just, our guy is on your right, and an ultra-Orthodox guy is on the left. That's just a chance encounter where they began to speak to each other. We did a lot of this kind of thing. Next. Again, that's our guy on the left. That was kind of an off day, and he's dressed that way, but he still engaged this guy. Next. Oh, that's doing the same thing. That's, by the way, that's the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. That's a whole story in itself, but let's keep going. That's my off day. Now, see, normally I would never wear short sleeves and shorts to go into this community, but this is down in Hebron, so we were just going there as a field trip. This was our end of campaign fun day, was to go down to Hebron, but this guy was there, and we wound up in a conversation, and you never know. So keep going. I don't think I'm going to take the time because we have about 10, 12 minutes left. These were just ways that we began to, I will tell you in 30 seconds. We began to experiment with ways to speak about Jesus with the ultra-Orthodox. You can't say Yeshua, you can't say Yeshu, Jesus, none of that. They'll walk away, they'll spit, they'll fight, they'll hit you, whatever. So they use the term for their rabbis, Admor, which it's an abbreviation or an acronym for our Lord, our teacher, our rabbi, our Admor so-and-so. So I was in campaign one day, or on this outreach, and I was looking at one of their signs where they used that word, and I'm thinking, and they were talking about a certain rabbi, the Rashbi, Shimon Bar Yochai. I'm thinking, if they call their guys that, how much more can we call our guy that, And so we began to refer to Jesus as our Admor, our Lord, our teacher, and our Messiah, and our rabbi. And then all of the famous rabbis have acronym-type names. Rabbi so-and-so. I've mentioned Rambam, Rashbi. They all have names like that. So I thought, what kind of name could we give Jesus that fits that frame, in this community? The Ribad, Rabbi Yeshua ben David, Rabbi Jesus, son of David. It's an acronym for that, the Ribad. And we could talk to these ultra-Orthodox guys and say, well, the Ribad says blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, the Ribad, I haven't heard of him, But they wouldn't want to show their ignorance and say, who's he? So we got to talk about the substance of what Jesus said or what he did, and the conversation would continue. It was amazing. So that we kind of discovered midstream, and we're going to try to continue to develop that. I think maybe we're out of slides. Is there anything left? Oh, well, just play that. That's just kind of for fun. This is one of the guys on my team. He runs our work in Paris, so he's on our staff. I don't know who caught him walking uphill this way, but when I saw that, I thought, that's exactly what this ministry feels like to the ultra-Orthodox. That captures it better than any words. But tell you what, we have 9 minutes. We're not going to go late. Q&A time. Yes. Oh, okay, Matthew 16, 17. Yeah, I was talking about Superman and Clark Kent, right? And let me turn there real fast, because I loves it. All right, so Matthew 16 and 17. In Matthew 16 is where, the transfiguration, or no, 17 is anyway, it's before the transfiguration, but it's where, sorry, I'm just turning there and going by memory as I turn. Okay, so it's where they go up to what's today called Banyas, Caesarea Philippi, and he says to the guys, the few disciples, who do people say I am, right? Who do people say the Son of Man is? John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Who do we know? Well, what do you guys say? And Peter says, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God," right? And Jesus says, "Yes, you're right. Blessed are you." And he affirms him. And then the last verse of of that section, Matthew 16, is weird. It says, "Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah." It's like, I just asked you who I am. You just told me I'm the Messiah, and now don't tell anybody. It's a bit surprising. And then the very next verse says, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and then he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." Now, why is that there? Well, because they just said, "You're the Messiah," and he says, "Yeah, you're right, but don't tell anybody." And then he begins to explain what he's about to experience, right? Because in the popular mind, as I said earlier, they thought the Messiah is going to come and get rid of Rome, get rid of the bad guys. You know, it's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. You know, everything's going to change. He's going to beat up the bad guys, and we're going to live a good life. No. He had to say, "I'm not coming as Superman right now. I'm coming as Clark Kent, and you need to understand that. This is what I'm going to do as the Messiah." And then Peter takes him aside and says, "Dude, are you serious? That can't happen to you." And then, he says, "Get behind me, Satan," right? We know that thing. And then at the end of where he corrects Peter there, he says, "I tell you the truth." He's saying, "Listen to me, dude. Listen to me, guys. Some of you who are standing here are not going to die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And like, as a new believer for me, it's like, they're all dead. Is the Bible wrong? What is this? And then you read the next verse in chapter 17, and it's the transfiguration. After 6 days, he takes them up, and he appears to them in his glory. It's the Son of Man as he's going to be coming in his kingdom. It all hangs together, but the whole point of that, sort of the meta point of what's happening is dealing with the messianic expectations that people had then and now, where he had to correct that and speak of how it's going to be the first time and the second time. Anyway, there's my answer in a nutshell. Yeah. Yeah, those guys, the Haredim. So the question is, if the women are so oppressed, why didn't the men stop our women from coming, let's say? Yeah, that did happen sometimes. Some of the men said, "No, we can't have this," or "I don't want this," or "I don't want you speaking to these people." But other times, the men are in their own world. They do their own thing, and they probably saw this as harmless or something that, could benefit their wife, and they allowed it. We saw it happen both ways, yeah. A note. I could try. The question was, there was a famous rabbi, a Sephardic rabbi named Kaduri, who had a handwritten note, the story says, and I've seen it, of course, and it was sealed and not to be opened until after he died, and in cryptic form, the way so many things in Judaism and the way rabbis communicate, it was like the first letter of every word spelled the name Yehoshua, which is the long name of Yeshua, the name of Jesus, but it's also the name of Joshua. But anyway, the story said, this eminent rabbi is telling us the Messiah's name is Jesus. He was a secret believer, is the story. There was a guy who wrote a book about it. From what I understand, so the rabbi's sons say it didn't happen. You're misconstruing this. You're twisting and distorting it. It's a lie. He would never think that or believe that. So by and large, it's embroiled in controversy, or many think it was discredited. But that's That's all I can say on that, really. In terms of rabbis saying the Messiah is here and will be revealed within a year, I'm not sure which group you've read that about or heard. There's usually always some rabbis who think the Messiah is coming soon, but I'm not sure which one that is. Yeah. 3 minutes, 3 questions. Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you did a good job, actually, unpacking that, the huge influence of culture when we try to communicate. I don't have anything to add to what you said, and we're about out of time, so I think, oh, all right, yeah, go ahead.
So when approaching a Jew who follows the practices of Judaism, are they willing to discuss the text like they have the Torah, of course, but like the other passages, like the prophets or like the book of Daniel?
Okay, so the question is, when you approach a Jewish person, are they willing to discuss the texts like we saw in the church service, the prophets and Daniel, etc.? My shortest answer would be, ask them if they're willing. Some are and some aren't. Seriously, would you be willing to look at an interesting thing in your own Bible with me that I think is about Jesus? Maybe you think it isn't, but would you take a look? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So as I'm looking at that, I'm thinking for us as a church, we're hoping to move in that direction of reaching into the culture, because we can't just put up a sign and expect people to show up and question who Jesus is. And we as a church need to figure out ways that we can step into culture and change our approach and do it very similar to what you were doing on that. How long were you there? 2 weeks or?
No. I was there 7 weeks altogether. Our outreach was like 5 weeks. Yeah.